For the better part of a decade, nobody really talked about this stuff. It was kind of forgotten. Now it's suddenly at the very center of a new global scramble. I'm talking about uranium, of course. And in this explainer, we're going to break down why it's become one of the most strategic and hotly contested resources on the entire planet.
All right, so let me ask you a question. What's the one thing that connects three of the absolute biggest trends shaping our world right now? I'm talking about the massive, staggering energy thirst of the AI revolution, the desperate push for national energy security, and the global race to hit climate goals. What sits right in the middle of all three? Well, the answer is nuclear power. And the incredible surge in demand for it has kicked off this fierce global competition for its one essential fuel, uranium. It's a high-stakes story of demand, supply, and geopolitics, and it is unfolding right now.
Okay, so to really get what's going on here, you've got to understand that this is a tale of two massive forces at play. First up, let's talk about what you could almost call a demand tsunami, the incredibly powerful case for why uranium demand isn't just growing, it's exploding.
Just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, get this number in your head, 6 to 8. That's the number of new nuclear reactors China is planning to start building. Not in total, every single year. That alone is a colossal new source of demand, and believe me, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
And look, this is not just a China story, not by a long shot. You've got India ramping up its nuclear program, countries all over the EU completely reversing course to embrace it, and the US and Japan extending the lives of their existing reactors. Then you layer on top of that the absolutely insane amount of power needed for AI data centers and a huge policy shift in the West towards energy security. It's a perfect storm for demand.
And believe me, this isn't just talk or some vague plan. This number, $3.5 billion, that's the value of the new U.S. Uranium Reserve Program. It's a massive government move designed to do one thing: create solid, predictable demand for uranium from the U.S. and its allies and steer that business away from geopolitical rivals. This is industrial policy in real time. And you can see this shift happening in the market right now. For the longest time, utilities are just buying what they needed on the short-term spot market. No big deal. Now, they are scrambling to lock in supply for the next 10, even 15 years. As one source puts it, it's a return to the kind of behavior we haven't seen since the last big price boom. That tells you everything you need to know. They are expecting a very tight market for a very long time. But that incredible demand tsunami, that's really only half the story. So now we have to flip the coin and look at the other side of the equation, the supply. Because at the exact same moment that demand is surging, the world's ability to actually produce uranium is facing a huge structural squeeze. And this is where the geopolitical risk just jumps right off the page. I mean, look at this. A huge chunk of the world's primary uranium supply, we're talking around 40%, it all comes from one single country, Kazakhstan. Any political problem, any disruption there sends massive shockwaves through the entire global market. And that supply chain fragility, it does not stop there. Take Niger, another important producer. It accounts for over 5% of global supply, and it's in a part of the world that's, let's be honest, incredibly unstable, with constant threats of coups that could disrupt mining and exports at any moment. It is another major weak link in the chain. And then, of course, you have Russia. Now, the issue here isn't just about digging uranium out of the ground. It's about a crucial processing step called enrichment, which basically gets the uranium ready to be used as fuel. Before 2022, Russia controlled something like 40% of global enrichment capacity. As you can imagine, with sanctions tightening, Western utilities are now scrambling to find alternatives, creating a massive bottleneck in the fuel cycle.
So you might be asking, why is the supply side so brittle? Well, it all goes back to 2011 and the Fukushima disaster. After that, the price of uranium crashed, and for more than a decade, nobody invested in finding or building new mines. The thing is, you can't just flip a switch and open a new mine. That takes years, sometimes a decade. So now that demand is suddenly here, the world is staring down a structural supply gap. The new mines we need are still years away from producing anything.
So, okay, the supply and demand picture looks incredibly, incredibly tight. But to be fair and get the full picture, we have to look at the other side. What could go wrong? What could actually derail this whole uranium boom? That brings us to the bear case, the potential headwinds. Look, even with that powerful long-term story, there are some very real risks to consider.
a deep, prolonged global recession could definitely hit energy demand. It's possible Kazakhstan could figure out its production issues and bring more supply back online faster than people think. And as we're about to see, there are some major technological hurdles to clear. Okay, so a massive part of the bull case for future demand relies on these new next-generation advanced reactors, right? They're called SMRs. The catch is, these new designs, they need a special kind of fuel, a more potent fuel, called HALEU. And here's the problem. Right now, there is basically no commercial supply chain for HALEU outside of Russia. If building out that supply chain takes too long, it could seriously delay these new reactors and push a big chunk of that future demand further down the road.
All right, so we've laid out the powerful bull case, this demand tsunami, and we've looked at the real headwinds, the bear case. So, what happens when these two massive forces collide? Where are we likely headed for the rest of this decade?
It really boils down to this fundamental conflict, doesn't it? On one side, you have these deep structural forces like decarbonization and energy security, things that are going to be with us for decades. On the other side, you've got more cyclical, short-term risks like a possible recession or delays in new tech. It's a classic battle between a powerful, long-term trend and some very real short-term bumps in the road.
So, after weighing both sides, what's the final verdict from the source material we're looking at? Well, the conclusion is pretty clear. The bullish factors, the structural demand, the fragile geopolitical reality, and the consequences of a decade of underinvestment, they just seem to be more powerful, more structural, and more durable than the potential short-term headwinds. Okay, so what does that actually look like for the market through 2030? Well, it likely means a period of high sustained prices. It means we're probably going to see a persistent gap between supply and demand. We should also expect a lot of volatility whenever there's a geopolitical shock. But all of that will spur a new wave of investment, both in new mines and in expanding the West's ability to process nuclear fuel. It's basically a race to rebuild an entire strategic industry from the ground up.
And all of this leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. As nations around the world increasingly focus on energy security and building resilient supply chains, is this intense scramble for uranium just a one-off thing? Or is it actually a preview of a whole new era of competition for strategic resources? That's the bigger picture to keep in mind. Thanks for tuning in.